Zoos are pivoting towards conservation and education being their main focus, both tangibly and aesthetically, was the way that they present themselves to their visitors. This is a good thing, and a good place for zoos to go, especially as the public became more aware of animal rights in the 2000s and 2010s. Zoos do a lot of really good conservation work. It's what the Bronx Zoo was founded for. But that doesn't mean that they can't be looked at critically. The way that they choose to portray information to their visitors should be examined. Stories are often sanitized, because zoos of course have to be kid-friendly, and putting aside conservation for a bit and just focusing on information about animals, this is a big problem because animals are not PG. Animals kill and eat each other regularly as part of their lifestyles. Animals procreate, and while these difficult topics are touched upon in zoos, they're still heavily censored. While you probably know that a carnivore eats other animals, you would never actually see a recognizable animal carcass in its exhibit, even though that is the kind of stuff it eats. And while reproduction and mating habits might be talked about if they're notable or fun, you would never see a zoo have a little plaque of information talking about an animal's genitalia. Even though that is an aspect of the animal, that is an adaptation that they've evolved along with any other body part, it is a part of the animal's body that won't be censored if you're seeing a real animal. We've put our own code of morality onto animals and onto what information about animals is fit to teach, but it is entirely based around what's taboo for humans. It's entirely based around human examples, not animal ones. And that's worth investigating. What objective information about animals have we deemed not safe to teach, and why? The one situation where purposefully upsetting and graphic imagery is used in zoos is when talking about conservation. They want to upset visitors, even children, so that the grave reality of the present is burned into their brain, and children beg their parents to donate to the zoo. Because that's the thing, while I am of course pro-conservation, the zoo is ultimately doing this so you'll give them money. They've been able to position themselves as a morally good place to spend your money. And I'm sure a lot of businesses envy that. While I do think zoos do legitimately good conservation work, it's valid to investigate and critique the ways they portray the events they're teaching about, their role in it, and how they frame your role as a consumer. At the Bronx Zoo specifically, and this is in exhibits that are a little bit old, they framed overpopulation as the problem, or at least as something that should get you worried about the future. When overpopulation is not the problem that is driving the destruction of environments, it is other aspects of capitalism. They've created a very firm divide between the natural wild and humanity, and they position it like humanity is inherently always going to destroy the wild, when that isn't true. There are ways to live in harmony with wilderness that don't just involve giving them money to stop or slow the inevitable expansion of humanity. It's an odd way of framing, you get what I'm saying? Specifically, the overpopulation stuff really irked me, because that is an argument that can be used to justify a really harmful worldview, that this is something inevitable or inherent to humanity. So yeah, I do think that the education and conservation work that zoos do is very important, but the way that they control the information should be interrogated, not just accepted as objective scientific fact. They are able to make a narrative and to control a narrative, and ultimately their goal is for you to care about conservation so you can give them money. And what I was saying earlier about that balance between making the viewer entertained and making the viewer not feel like they're participating or enabling bad animal care, it's also an optic thing. Sometimes by withholding information about animals, they make themselves look better than they are, and the public doesn't know better because they haven't been told by the zoo, and they put trust in the zoo to tell them if something is up. Like, for example, the Bronx Zoo's elephant problem. If you look in the news about the Bronx Zoo, this is something that's really been coming up, because the current people protesting it are trying to make it into a big deal. They want a lot of media attention, but it isn't really a strictly black and white thing. So in recent years, it's become very, very clear that elephants need a lot of space and they need to be in a herd. A solitary elephant is inherently abused. Families are a really, really important part of the way that they live. So the Bronx Zoo currently has two 50-year-old elephants, and this is of a life expectancy of around 50 to 80 years. It's not certain. And they tried to introduce new elephants into the herd, and that went poorly. And they think that if they were to move these elephants now, they are too old and too attached to the keepers there to be able to successfully reintegrate into a different herd or a different environment. So they're kind of just silently waiting it out until the elephants die. They don't want the elephants to be living in bad conditions, but they claim that they don't think there's another option right now. And I mean, it's good that they're not getting new elephants, I guess, but it's strange. You can still see them in exhibit as part of the Wild Asia monorail, and it's weird. I'm definitely not fully on the side of the people who are just trying to make it into a big media moment, but I get what they're coming from, because this is poor care of the animals, and the Bronx Zoo is kind of just saying, oh no, we don't have a choice, which is weird. And I think in general, if they were more open about, yeah, this isn't a good way to keep elephants, but we're phasing them out, I don't know what the public response would be. Probably bad, because they don't want to know that the animals they're seeing are being treated poorly. But if somebody does know that elephants can't live solitarily or in groups of two, hearing this would be reassuring, at least that they know that they're doing something bad. I don't know, it's weird, right? Are they in the right for withholding information that would make the viewer uncomfortable? It's a strange situation with how much trust we've placed into zoos to be places of education and to know what's best for their animals. Another point that I want to make in this section is that information about animals as individuals is very, very rare. If you see an informational plaque about an animal, it is about its species, with the exception of apes, sometimes tigers, if they want to give you a fun factoid about how all tiger stripes are different, and here's how you can identify the different tigers, and sea lions during the sea lion show, I guess. But this is weird, because from my experience working at the zoo, I know that every animal has a name and it has an interesting story about how it came here. It oftentimes has a lot of personality and specific things it likes. When I was working at the Bronx Zoo, one of my favorite things was getting to tell people the animals' names and their stories. For example, in the children's zoo in the Bronx Zoo, we had a skunk named Prince who used to be somebody's exotic pet. They had got his scent gland removed, and obviously having a skunk as a pet is horrible and immoral, so it was either taken from them by authorities or they relinquished it to them, I'm not certain. But this was an interesting thing to say. Often people were scared about it spraying them, and I said, oh no, he doesn't have a scent gland because his owner had it removed. Isn't the keeping of exotic pets horrible and cruel? I was able to segue into an interesting topic and conversation, and for kids and families, teach them a lesson about exotic pets. Because we also had fennec foxes, so this came up a lot. People seeing the fennec foxes and immediately going, oh, they're so cute, I want one. And I had to step in and tell them why that is a bad thing in the industry. And they probably didn't know. This was a lot of their first time ever seeing a fennec fox. And it's the same as the skunk. A lot of people didn't think skunks were cute until they saw Prince. He's adorable. And I got to talk to them about this exotic pet business so they knew that this was a thing going on that they should be aware of and that they should care about. Right now, especially during the COVID lockdown, personal looks at the animals are kind of becoming a thing. That's kind of what the intimate animal experiences that the Bronx Zoo sells are, and that's what part of the appeal for the sea lion shows are, is getting to know the animals' names and their stories. Oh, and the Zoo TV show. I haven't mentioned the Zoo TV show yet. The Zoo TV show is huge. It's about the New York City zoos, especially the Bronx Zoo. It played a large part in rehabilitating their image as places that care about animals first and foremost, after stuff like Blackfish and PETA really tanked in the early 2000s and 2010s. The zoo being a place where you got to know the keepers that worked at zoos and how much they really did care for the animals and got to see their bond with the animal and got to know the animal's individual story was really important. At the Bronx Zoo, there are still plaques mentioning when an animal has been on the zoo, what the problem that episode was about, and how they solved it. There was some antelope with a broken leg that they ended up making a cast for. There were animals that have had a hard time growing accustomed to their environment environment that they've put a lot of care into making sure felt comfortable there. In these zooplaques, you get to learn a little bit of the animal's personality and the troubles that they went through and how the zoo has tried to solve them. And I think that that should be first and forefront. I feel like that might be a good direction for zoos to go in the future, is to provide more information about specific animals and their stories. But of course it's odd, because this is another case where too much information can make them look bad. A lot of animals are from breeding projects gotten from other zoos, and oftentimes the story is, we purchased this animal because we know people want to come see this animal because we want money. And different animals at the zoo are obviously different levels of marketable. I doubt a lot of people would want to read the plaque of a snake story. It's been in this enclosure. What do you want it to say? But people love learning the personalities of the different gorillas and even the sea lions. They would love to know how they interact with each other. They would love to be able to get the group dynamics going on. They would love to hear these interesting stories about where the animals have come from and what they've been through. I kind of feel like this is the place for zoos to go in the future. But that's just my speculation. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in regards to how zoos present themselves nowadays compared to how they used to. I said earlier that zoos today are making a push and pivoting towards being places of education and conservation, but that was always zoos' goal. That was always the virtue that they claimed to be holding up, especially the Bronx Zoo, which was created for conservation. It was created to save the American bison, and we'll get into that, because that's an interesting story. Okay, I said that mean. It is an interesting story. 4 Hours Ken Burn documentary. But zoos have always been trying to position themselves as places of science, places for the educational man, as opposed to the circuses of the time. And there's a lot that came with that. There's a lot of baggage that we'll get into in the final section. And there's noble goals that were always stuff that they were aiming for, but weren't actually reflected in the horrible, cramped, abusive zoos of the time. And in 50 years, we'll probably look back on the zoos of today similarly. This is in part because of how much zoos can get away with the public not really knowing about animals and the way that they're able to control the information that the public does know about animals. But this is also from advancements in our understanding of animals. We often didn't know that animals were in poor conditions. In fact, we still don't really know the answers of animal cognition, but early on in zoos' life, it was thought that they were just automatons that responded to stimuli and that they didn't have emotions or complex family structures. And there's still a lot for us to learn. There's still a lot that will change about our understanding of animals. And zoos are doing a good job of accommodating that, but it is an odd gamble. There is a push and pull of being places where the public is entertained, therefore giving them money, and being places where the animals are taken care of, and being places of education. So yeah, there really is a lot at play. There really are a lot of interesting questions that should be asked.